You know what the most dangerous thing in America is, right? Nigga with a library card.
This is the Most Dangerous Thing in America podcast, a show in which we read books by black authors. And they're talked about by a black author, and you can listen if you are black or not black. That is okay. That's the sound of the book that we're reading today. When Crack Was King by Donovan X. Ramsey. We're actually finishing the last 4 sections. In this book, they're called acts, so the last 4 acts. If you didn't listen to the first 4, you can go back, listen to that podcast episode. In it, you will notice my voice sounds a lot worse this week. I've had my Ricola. I've had my warm water and salt, little country recipe for you. Remedy recipe, both. And so the throat is clear. I won't do any vocal warm-ups, like do, re, mi. I'm not going to do all that. I don't sing well. But I sound better. So the first 4 sections, this book in general, so the way it's structured is we get 4 memoirish tells. Lenny, Elgin, Kurt, and Sean. Lenny is a young lady who was abused and then got into crack and prostitution in LA. Elgin is a white kid who grew up with an addict father in Yonkers. Kurt is the wonder kind who grew up in Baltimore and went to Yale and worked in DC and came back to Baltimore and was the mayor for like 12 years. And Sean was a basketball player from Newark who got into selling crack and eventually ran with the America famous, not world famous, Zoo Crew, especially if you were into certain types of hip hop. And then, so each section of the book, each act gives us some of their backstory and then a little bit of historical background. And Ramsey does a really good job of weaving these things together. And those are like each separate chapter. So you get a chapter about Kurt, chapter about Lenny, and then a section that tells you about Rick Ross. And that's actually where we left off with Ready Rock, with Rick Ross, Freeway Rick Ross, who everybody knows by now, made famous by many hip-hop musicians, but probably most famous, Rick Ross, the parole officer turned hip-hop artist. So that's where we are in the book. We start with Act 5 then, and we get a quick breakdown of everybody's life. So let's just go through that. I don't have a lot to add here, except for mostly just like, wow, can you believe it? Because that's a lot of what you're reading about here. And at the end, I'll restate the thesis that Ramsey started out with. I thought he finished with it really strongly. I didn't quite remember it as I was reading the book, but it didn't matter because he succeeded in his thesis, and when he restated it, I thought, oh yeah, that was totally and undeniably achieved in the book. So anyway, Lenny, she graduates high school while being addicted to crack and while going into Culver City and prostituting herself. She had no pimp, prostituting herself to get not just crack, but also like stuff in general. Her family was abusive. And she does all that, and then she goes into the rehab eventually called the House of Uhuru. My only note here was, they kicked her out, and it seemed like kind of a tough love clinic, but also like must be very difficult, especially at that time. You have limited space, and if somebody's not going along with the program, you kind of just have to cut your losses, but that just seems so callous, and this doesn't feel like a callous place, so I imagine that must have been very difficult. But that's where Lenny's at. Graduated high school, trying to get clean. First of all, graduating high school while addicted to crack. Insane. Amazing that she was able to do that. And she had a kid at this time, I believe, already. So just, very resilient and trying to get clean and just kind of not able to do it. But wanting to do better, striving, trying, really. Had a hard upbringing. Okay. Then we move on to Kurt. And Kurt is my second favorite character in the book. My first is Sean, the basketball player. No surprise there. But Kurt, he's the mayor of Baltimore. And basically what he's trying to do is return Baltimore back to its former glory. So there's 3 real distinct Baltimores. They say downtown, inner harbor, and the suburbs. Now, I've been to Baltimore. I enjoyed it a lot. 3 distinct: downtown, Inner Harbor, and the suburbs. I feel like there's more than that, but I get the gist. Downtown is like, no, Inner Harbor was revitalized. That's true. Downtown, I guess, is everything that's not revitalized, which is I think it's like too large of an area, because there's definitely economic blight in a lot of areas of downtown Baltimore. But then there's like super nice pockets as well. And then there's pockets that are further down the something more than economic blight. Like there's more going on than just like, oh, like it's kind of run down here. It's like, well, it maybe kind of is dangerous. And then the suburbs are the suburbs. So anyway, he's trying to make everything like Inner Harbor. And, the thing about Baltimore is that it's such a beautiful place. I'm really with Kurt on this. Like, it's got so much history. It has 76 National Historic Landmarks. Now, somehow New York has 270, New York City, but whatever. And, Schmoke is like, hey, we want to bring it back, but I don't want to like just throw everybody in prison who has a problem. So he's famous for being the guy who Bunny Colvin in The Wire is based off of. And he brings up the idea of like decriminalization of drugs and is just criticized everywhere. One of the weirder criticisms I thought was Charlie Rangel, excuse me, who said about Schmoke, those who taught legalization reminded me of fans sitting in the cheap seats at the ballpark. They may have played the game and they may have think they know all the rules, but from where they're sitting, they can't judge the action. I thought that was a weird thing to say about Schmoke, who's from Baltimore and worked as the DA in Baltimore and worked as a DA in DC. It's not like I don't understand that comment. Like, oh, he's some young whippersnapper. He had worked there before. He's from there. He knows what it's like. So I thought I didn't like that. And then the other thing in general, just reading this chapter, and it's borne out later in the book, Schmoke is proven right. Like, decriminalization was the way to go. Treating addiction as an illness is the way to go. This is a better idea than like trying to eradicate every drug user. It's very similar to that David Cross joke about trying to rid the world of terrorism. Like, you're not going to rid the world of terrorism by killing all the terrorists. That's not how that works. Okay, but just to hammer why that is such a ridiculous idea, here's what one of the congressmen said to the idea of decriminalization. Others on the committee simply condemned Schmoke's proposal as surrender in the war on drugs. We just sent a spaceship up into space today, said Congressman E. Clay Shaw Jr. of Florida. And we can, from space, pinpoint where every cocaine leaf is on the face of this earth that is growing out in the sunshine. We can do it. And then this is not a quote anymore. And if countries like Colombia and Bolivia didn't cooperate with the U.S. government's efforts, Shaw said, take them out, period. It's just stupid. You take out an entire country to get rid of coke when the demand, that's the supply. What about the demand? It's nuts. Anyway, so that's Kurt Schmoke dealing with having a different idea and absolutely absurd political responses to it. Either one, Democrats like Charlie Rangel being like, this kid doesn't know what he's talking about, or two, Republicans being like, why don't we just kill everybody? Isn't that a way to end the war on drugs? Difference of opinions. Okay, then we get an update on Elgin. So I guess I should have said spoiler alert about his dad being a crackhead. The way the chapter starts out, I did not know his dad was going to be a crackhead. I didn't know that's how his story was going to happen. Because in the first half of the book, he doesn't get that much, I was going to say screen time, page time, whatever. And then all of a sudden you find out his dad is a crackhead. Excuse me. For the term crackhead, Ramsey prefers that we don't just use that because it's been used pejoratively for so long. But in the book, I believe Elgin does use that term to describe his father. So that's me quoting Elgin, not me derisively calling his father a crackhead. And then we get to the section which is historical. It's called War. It covers Nixon through Reagan and the idea of the war on drugs, Reagan signing into law the 1986, what is it called? 1986 Drug Abuse Act of 1986 added another $1.7 billion to law enforcement drug treatment and education programs, increased mandatory sentences, mandatory minimums, and 5 grams of crack cocaine. So let's see. Eighth is like 3.5 grams. Right. But that's marijuana. 5.5 grams of coke. Seems like a lot of coke. Minimum sentence of 5 years. 5 years for having 5 grams of coke. When I said it seems like a lot of coke, it's like a lot of coke for a person to do. 5 grams of coke is not really an amount of coke for a person to sell. So this is about taking anybody who's got drugs on them and throwing them into prison, which is what happened. And over the next several years, the prison population balloons, and that's where we are today. Okay, so then we go to Act 6, which is called Peak, and we get more character development. I'm not going to just, you can go through and read what's happening to these characters as their lives are changing. We get a little bit more Elgin here because he's not been prominently featured. But yeah, I just want to highlight one little thing that's very funny in this chapter. And then I want to get to some more bigger picture ideas in the book. So they're trying to... So now Bush is in the White House and they're trying to set up a sting so that like somebody will sell him crack so he can make a point in front of the national... Like they need crack for a stage prop, and they're like, let's get somebody to sell us crack. So here we go. Keith Jackson, the dealer who ultimately sold crack to the President of the United States, didn't seem to know what the White House was, let alone where it was. When undercover D agents phoned him to meet at a park near the White House, he reportedly replied, "Oh, you mean where Reagan lives?" The 18-year-old eventually found his way there, and on September 1st, 1989, exchanged 3 ounces of crack for $2,400. A lot of money. 1989, $2,400. Whew. That's a lot of money. So anyway, that's just funny that he didn't know. You mean where Reagan lives? And then, right. So then the big picture idea from this section, it goes through everybody's life, but the one that I drew out is the chapter with Sean. He ends up managing to graduate college against all odds because he's still selling drugs and all of this. But he graduates college, and then after graduating college, he gets back into the streets. And I was sitting here thinking it's really not surprising because if you're in college, right, what should you do? Well, you should go get an internship, okay? And then that way when you get out of college, you can hit the ground running. Now, if you are a poor person in college, you can't get an internship. Why? You have to get a job. So, or a paid internship. But especially in his day, there probably weren't paid internships, and he probably wasn't focused on that anyway because he needed money, right? So instead, you're focused on money. So then you graduate college, and you don't have a leg up with an internship, and you don't really know what you're doing because, one, you didn't have the internship, you have no professional experience whatsoever, you have no person to turn to and say like, oh, hey, like, remember when I interviewed at your job or worked at your job or did this at your job? Can you send me to this or that place, or recommend me a place to go or another thing to do? And on top of that, you don't have anybody in your family, in Sean's case, who went to college. So you can't call up your uncle and say, hey, Unc, like, remember when you got out of college? Or mom or dad, his dad wasn't in his life at that point, also didn't go to college. So yeah, it's unsurprising that he went back to the streets because just graduating college isn't enough. Then you got to navigate the whole professional world. And it's kind of like that thing that you hear people say now where they're like, they don't teach you how to play the stock market and invest in college or in high school. And it's like, yeah, okay, right. I mean, you more need to learn how to like, study and do a real job. And then also on top of it, there should be an elective where you could go learn stock market stuff and investment and things like that. But in this case, there should be like, there's always a orientation class when you get to college, and there's exit counseling for people who have student loans, myself. There should be another, whatever the opposite, there should be exit interviews, like for sports teams for when you're leaving college. There should be like another semester of just like support staff who just helps you get a job somewhere. Maybe even helps you get an apartment. Maybe even helps you budget things just for a couple of months. I would argue that's more important than the orientation. The orientation for me did nothing but just upset me. So it would have been useful. And I know they have like career centers and stuff like that, but it should almost be like mandatory or something. Maybe it is. Maybe I just was very, very bad at finding it. But I definitely think it would help. I don't know if it would have kept Sean out of the streets, but, could help other students who are first generation college students. Okay, let's go to Act 7, where we have 3 notes here that I made. The first note is on page 270, and it involves another president. This is now infamous. In the 90s, when President Clinton was president, he was like the first black president as a joke, But there is that line that Rhymefest says in one of Kanye's song, Clinton ain't in office, who's gonna give a shit free now? So there's definitely the idea that like Clinton was helping out. And then as time went on, we found out like, oh, whoops, Clinton was like super hard on young black men. And it was right there hiding out in the open, but he was good at, walking both sides of the aisle. That's the thing. He was tough on crime, but that played to plenty of black conservatives, certainly. And it played to even just like black people in general. Black people like Clinton or liked Clinton. And white people liked Clinton, and everybody kind of liked Bill Clinton. He really was perfect for what he was doing. Not a perfect president, but a perfect face. And to that face, we add this image of Clinton going to a execution for the photo op, which is difficult, which is not difficult, which is insane. I think to imagine, even in 2024, where we get crazy news every other day, I think it's pretty crazy for the president to attend. Well, he wasn't the president yet. Okay, a governor, no problem then. But so he goes and he flew to Arkansas, and this is during his campaign, and he attended the event despite the fact, and now I'm quoting, that no law required the governor to be present. Clinton reportedly remarked after it was over, I can be nicked a lot, but no one can say I'm soft on crime. And that really speaks to the American thing, like we went from a country. So this criminal who committed the crime, no doubt that he committed it, in committing the crime managed to cause himself major brain damage and was not able to he was mentally handicapped, so he shouldn't have been executed is the idea. But we went from a country that invested in infrastructure like housing and roads and transportation. And obviously we still invest in some of these things, but not to the extent that we did, certainly not with the zeal that we did, at least not an overwhelming zeal. But we went from a country that invested in those things to help poor people and instead started to invest in law and order so that we could punish poor people. And that's really where we're at in 2024. Around the turn of the 20th century, 30 years after, right after the Great Depression, it was obvious like a lot of American people aren't doing well. We're going to institute these public things to help these people. However you feel about the New Deal or whatever economically, we're not talking about that. Just talking about the sentiment. That was the sentiment. We need to do these things to help people. And now the sentiment is we need to police these people. That's the sentiment. Well, at least that was the sentiment for 25 years, 30 years, right? Let's say from like 1980 to 2010, 30 years. That was the sentiment. Just police the Christ out of them. And in the last 15 years, it swung back the other way. And hopefully we can get somewhere in the middle. We certainly want laws. We certainly want order, right? No one's saying that we don't want those things. What we want, though, is true equity. A society that's truly equitable. And that's not what we had from 1980 to 2010 with a prison population that ballooned because people had drug addictions, which is a medical problem, and we just threw them in prison. A lack of empathy and a lack of any kind of infrastructure to deal with those things. From there, we move on to Kurt Schmoke, and just kind of the same thing, right? More of the same of people still remembering him as being soft on crime because he didn't want to punish people who were drug addicts. I'm not saying, and the book isn't saying this, and Kurt Schmoke isn't saying that, like, it's this puritanical streak of Americans. Like, it's always this need to just say that the person is wrong. They're a drug addict, so they're wrong. Whatever. Like, we're not talking about whether it's right, wrong, or whatever. We're talking about what it is. What it is an addiction. We would like to cure that addiction without any moral nonsense. Now, if they commit a crime while they're addicted, okay, they're going to have to answer for that crime. But just being an addict, there's this need to, this deep-seated 400-year-old need to impose puritanical order on society and publicly condemn and admonish people who are morally, quote-unquote, suspect. And that's Kurt Schmoke's entire political career wrapped up in 45 seconds. Just, you want to help these people. They're the scourge of society. They're ruining society. They're not even worth saving or helping. Lock them up in prison and forget about them. And otherwise, we're not going to vote for you. And Kurt Schmoke trying to fight that. So, anyway, that's that. And then on page 299, Ramsey lays out a conspiracy that I think if you're listening to this and you're black, there is no way you haven't heard and that you would even call a conspiracy, right? And it's the entire way crack got started. And this is where it really helps if hip hop raised you, because as I was reading this chapter, I was just going like, well, I didn't read any black newspapers growing up because I didn't grow up in like DC or Baltimore or Atlanta, like a super chocolate city, and the internet wasn't around. So I didn't read any black newspapers. So how did I know about all of this? Well, it's hip hop, it's Dead Prez. Definitely. It was just basic gangster rap in general, talking about like hustling. Okay, right? It's there. But then that Kanye song, Crack Music, that was solid. But there was another one. I don't know how I knew about Gary Webb and that whole story. I can't remember because it was pre-internet. It must have just been reading like Double XL or something like that. Or The Source. I didn't really read Vibe. Must have been one of those. Okay, I guess I didn't read a black newspaper, but I did read hip-hop magazines. But anyway, the whole conspiracy is pretty simple. Reagan wanted to fund an illegal war in South America. In order to do so, Congress was like, no, you can't. The reason he wanted to fund illegal wars, Congress was like, nope, we're not doing that war. And this was all about Cold War satellite countries. And in order to do it, they needed money in order to fund this war against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. And to get that money, they were like, oh, okay, you can sell drugs in the inner city to like the subaltern black community. Who cares about them anyway? And also whoever else is in the inner city who's not black, but whatever. So go ahead and do that. And here's, Freeway Rick Ross and Manuel Noriega. I know Noriega was a drug dealer. I feel like he wasn't mentioned in this book, so maybe I'm mixing them up. But sell those drugs and then fund this illegal war, which became known as the Iran-Contra affair. And there's no black person who's my age who is sufficiently into hip-hop who doesn't know this storyline. The other one, of course, is like AIDS was started to wipe out black people. It's another one. if you're my age, that you know and possibly believe. And I'm trying to think of another like big one that's just black. But anyway, one of the things that happened is that the mainstream media didn't really take to this, and they kind of went out of their way to refute it and all of this stuff. And John Kerry, who was a senator at the time, was tasked with actually reporting on it. And it's pretty irrefutable that the CIA at least knew about some of the drug smuggling. Whether or not they actually set it up and, hey, go sell these drugs so we can do this, okay, fine. But they at least knew about it. They were at least in some way complicit. And so the newspapers who were refuting this were like, oh, it wasn't like this at all, or just over, downplayed it or whatever. But on top of all of that, they also said things like, well, black people are susceptible to conspiracy theories. And this same thing happened during COVID. Black people are susceptible to conspiracy theories. And I will say that, yes, black people are susceptible to conspiracy theories. I will also say that black people have a earned skepticism. We have a reason to be skeptical and believe something might be a conspiracy, because there's been a couple of times where those conspiracies have turned out to be true. And going a step further, you could even take that to just America at large. When you have things like false flag operations, when that kind of stuff is uncovered, it's going to lend itself to people thinking up more conspiracies, which is why we are where we are today, where nobody trusts half the institutions in America. So, yeah. Do I believe the CIA sold crack? Yes. Not even going to hesitate. Yes, I do. I think that's exactly what they did. I think that's exactly what happened. I've thought that since I was like 14 years old. So, you can't get enough research on it. That's the thing. If they wanted me to not believe, publish the book. Let me get it. Give me the full. They're never going to do that, right? We're never going to get the full thing. So, I mean, I don't know to what extent, but I believe they're complicit. The AIDS one, that's just too. We're never going to know the truth about AIDS. That's just one you have to accept. It's like the Kennedy assassination. We're never going to know the truth. Martin and Malcolm. Sure. We're never going to know the truth. All right. Getting into Act 8, recovery. So this is where, it all turns out good in a way. For one, the people survived. And you knew that going in because he was interviewing them all in present day 2021, 22, 2023. So that was great. But yeah, so this is Elgin's probably two biggest moments in the book, and then I'll just talk about Ramsey's conclusion. But his two biggest moments are when he's finally able to get out of Yonkers and he goes to work at a restaurant, and it's all white people somewhere on like the Upper East Side or West Side or something. And he's like, I'm not the kind of white person who eats at all white restaurants. Thought that was funny. And then on page 341, he talks about, let me get the exact quote, but the idea is that he's talking about what it's like after you get money and you grew up poor. So, no matter what he did or attained, Elgin felt like he needed something more. He loved his house, for example, but just 3 years after buying it, Elgin was ready to move on. This is many years after of hustling and scraping by. Home started to feel less like a goal and more like an investment strategy, and he became fixated on how the place where he lived should make him money. What's important here is this idea, it's kind of similar to when Sean left college. It's the idea that you're a success, you've made money, and like some people look at that when a person goes bankrupt, say like an NBA player is a famous example and stuff, but just even a person in your own life who maybe grew up with not so much money, and then you see them and like they buy something ridiculous, like that new money kind of thing, like they buy like a tacky Gucci jacket or something, leather pants with like Prada just all over it or something ridiculous, $500 jeans or $1,000 jeans or whatever it is, some crazy thing. And people go like, well, they should have invested their money wisely or something like that. And that's the thing, though. It's so difficult to tell a person who's worked for 20 years or 2 years or a single year that they should be careful with this money after they've been so careful for so long, you know? And the thing is I don't want to use the word trauma because it has a real connotation now. It's being overused. Just memories, right? Just an echo of the past. If you grew up poor, you're always going to remember when you were poor. And some people, that'll make them thrifty for the rest of their lives. But if you make enough money, what will happen, what often happens, not what will happen, but what often happens is you want to fill that gaping hole that's still inside of you, that is the memory of when you were poor, and you're filling it with material goods. So it's very much like what the philosopher Sean Carter once said: 9 to 5 is how you survive. I ain't trying to survive, I'm trying to live it to the limit and love it alive. So, it just makes sense. Of course you're going to ball out if there was a time where you could have never balled out. And then if you grow up in a middle class kind of environment and you get older and you get money, it's different. You didn't grow up like going to the store and having two things in your hands and being like, well, like your mother turning to you and be like, you can only have one. Or your mother turning to you and be like, you can't have either. Why are you touching those things? If that never happened to you, right? If whenever you needed something as a child, you got it, or you took vacations, right? Then yeah, you're not going to really be able to relate to the sentiment. The very existence of a vacation is a dream in the minds of a poor person, right? So if you grew up like that, of course it's weird to you when you see a person who just got some money buy something crazy. But that's how it is. So that's basically the book. And then Ramsey gives us a little coda in which he talks about why he wrote the book, which was to humanize these people. And who are these people? These are survivors of the crack era. And he points out we need to get away from the terms crack baby, crackhead, super predator, and move towards the terms Elgin, Sean, Kurt, and Lenny. We need to view these people as people. And I thought that was really a salient point because for me, I was like, I know about the crack era. I did know most of the stuff that was in this book. Some of the details were funny to me, but that's mostly why I didn't have so many takeaways. I don't know how you can listen to hip hop for most of your life and not know most of this stuff. But viewing people as people, well, that's a revolutionary concept. And that's something that Hanif Abdurraqib was saying in his book as well. This concept of the people who live in these communities, they're all just either like victims or criminals, right? It's either a bunch of criminals who are living there victimizing the people who are there, or and they're victims in the sense of only being victims of the criminals in their community, right? Rather than viewing it as, hey, these people love where they live, and if they're victims of something, it's victims of the system which has made this area unsustainable, right? Like the economic opportunities that left the area are what turned this place and that place and that place, all inner cities, into unsafe places. And in those unsafe places, crack came in and was king and dominated. And instead of people looking at those people and going, well, they need help, they went, how can we punish them until they stop? How can we punish them until they stop being addicted? And that gets, of course, it's about race, but it's also just about poor people too, right? Because it's the same for white folks as well. But of course, it's always going to be worse for black folks. And they're always going to get less help, at least historically. Let's not say always. Let's hope that changes going forward. Try not to be cynical. But the thing wasn't let's see how we can help these people in these communities. It was let's see how we can punish these people in these communities. And when that happens, you end up dehumanizing an entire population, and did it for decades. And only now, as the fog clears, are people realizing the mistake. So I thought it was a great thesis that he proved. I didn't even remember it from the beginning of the book, but when I got to the end of the book, I was like, absolutely, yeah, that makes sense. And even me, a person who was steeped in all of this history and knew it, having listened to it, still was able to learn, like, right, crackhead, crack baby. I would never use the term super predator as a joke, but crackhead for sure. Right, that's a person who has an addiction, right? I don't, other than pothead, I don't call people, because pothead's like not serious, but like somebody has an opioid addiction, they have an opioid addiction, right? I don't call them some other name or whatever in 2024. So crackhead, even looking back in time, even though mostly crack is gone, certainly doesn't have the place it once had. There's no benefit to derisively using that term. So, and when we do that, we dehumanize our own people. So yeah, this is a great read. I think it's a great read for anybody really. And what I like about it most is its readability. You're going to be fascinated by the characters. I think if I had a complaint, I'd want even more, detail about the characters, but then it really would get away from the historical record. And I thought that stuff was important too. I thought it was a great blend. It's perfect. You can really blast through it as a nonfiction book. It's not slow. It's engaging. Right amount of history, right amount of human interest. And yeah, a good read overall. All right. That's going to do it for today on the podcast. We will be back in 2 weeks with a nonfiction book, really changing it up here. Let me get the title. In the meantime, while I'm looking at the title, you should subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, YouTube, where we're getting some good numbers. And if you like the music that's playing right now, you should check out in the show notes. That's TheKeepRunning, so check them out. If you want to read some stuff that I've written, check out the show notes. There's my writings in there. And yes, when we come back, it'll be August 1st. We will be doing Smoke Kings by Jamal Mayfield. And I hope you're there with us. That'll be the first fiction book of the summer. Yeah, that's true. We did. There's always this year. Then this is when Crack was king, and then Smoke Kings, and then we're getting out of fiction again. We're going back to nonfiction. So it's a heavy nonfiction summer. So maybe you tell you what, in the fall, the seasons change. It's crisp outside. That's novel season. We're going to do a whole fall of novels. That's a guarantee. Do a whole fall of novels. All right. So until then, not until fall, until next time, stay safe, stay black, and keep reading.
Time enough at last. That's not fair. That's not fair at all. There was time now. There was all the time I needed. That's not fair. That's not fair.